I'll call the meeting to order and ask if you'll stand and join us in the singing of O Canada, please. Thank you. Item 2.2 on the agenda, please join me in a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. Item 2.3 is the adoption of the open session agenda as amended. Councillor Vail, I believe you have that.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Richardson, that the agenda for the open session of the regular council meeting of Tuesday, February the 18th, 2020 be adopted as circulated with the following amendment. Deletion, item 6.1, unveiling of the event poster for the 2020 International Plowing Match and Rural Expo. In addition to closed session, item 14.3.7, Personal Matter Municipal Act 2001 S.239, 2B, Personal Matters about identifiable individuals.
Thank you. All in favor? That's passed. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest on today's agenda? Seeing none. Notices and information by members of council and staff. Council, any notices, information? Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, and through you, on Wednesday, February 26th at the Bethany United Church, it's the Pancake Supper from 5 to 6:30. Saturday, February 29th, the Manvers Arena Fundraising Dance featuring live music by Punch Douglas starting at 8 p.m. And Sunday, March 1st, the Janetville Community Centre is hosting their first Kids Magic Show at 11 a.m.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore. Put your microphone on. Yep.
Just like to recognize the successful radar run that was held at Pleasant Point, just off Pleasant Point. There were close to 1,000 people that were there last Sunday, and I'd like to thank all the sponsors and volunteers that put that together. It was a great event. This February 28th at 7 o'clock at the Downeyville Hall will be the official opening of the Phase 1 of the front entrance renovation of Downeyville Hall. There'll be several local bands that will be performing there, and a luncheon served afterwards. This is the first phase of the 2 phases of this renovation of the Downeyville Hall. It's certainly an amazing accomplishment by the community there, and it looks great. So they're commemorating the first phase of this on the 28th. And then finally, the Omemee Concert Series will be holding a concert at Coronation Hall in Omemee on March 6th at 7 p.m. Donovan Woods will be the concert for him, and tickets are available through James McKenty at 705-933-4042. That's March 6th at 7 p.m. at the Coronation Hall in Omemee.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor O'Reilly.
Just 3 events going on at the Lindsay Exhibition, the East Central Farm Show, March 4th and 5th. There's a live dinosaur exhibition on, at March 19th to the 22nd, and then the Spotlight in Agriculture, March 27th. It's already sold out with over 400 tickets sold. And then there's just the ongoing construction you may have noticed on Kent Street. So between Councillor Dunn and I, we haven't had too many calls anyway so far. So likely, hopefully it's on time and on budget, and look forward to working on it the rest of the year.
Thank you. Any other members of council? Seeing none. Staff, any announcements from staff? Seeing none, we'll move down to item 5, which is the council minutes. I need a motion that the minutes of the January 28th, 2020 regular council meeting be received and adopted, please. Councillor Helmsley and Richardson, all in favor? That's passed. We'll move into item 6.2, which is a deputation regarding a request for quotation 2020-02CQ, supply and delivery of 2 single-axle and 4 tandem-axle trucks. It's in relation to item 9.1.2 on the agenda, and that report has been extracted by myself. So, Mr. Clark, come on up. You got 5 minutes, sir. We'll try to be gentle if you go over. Right, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor and Council, thank you for the opportunity to put forth this deputation. I'm a little disappointed already. I had submitted a fairly comprehensive information packet when I submitted my request for deputation. I don't think all council members got a copy of it to read beforehand. So I'm going to take the time and read.
Sir, just so you know, it was submitted as part of our council package. We all have it in our package. So we'll receive that along with your deputation. So we got that as part of our package.
Okay, thank you very much. That letter is more concise than what I'll probably be at the moment. The primary impetus for my deputation today is that myself and my son are both taxpayers in the city of Kawartha Lakes. It's a great place to live. It appears to me that the purchase of these half dozen plow trucks kind of are programmed under the Lean Sigma 6 program, and as far as I can tell, it's not working. We submitted a bid. Some members of the municipality might view it as we did it incorrectly because we didn't request permission to bid, because we bid Freightliner brand trucks. The request for quote requested Internationals and Macs only. City of Kawartha Lakes has not purchased a Mack truck since 2014. A lot has changed in 6 years. You have a plow contractor using Mack trucks by the name of Todd Brothers. Those trucks seem to do a good job for the City of Kawartha Lakes. There was an addendum sent out targeted towards Mack truck. They wouldn't accept their front axle because it's a proprietary axle manufactured by Mack. 20,000 pound rating, which was required for the job. But the response to the addendum was no, they would not accept it, which effectively put Mack trucks out of the bid process. We did not specifically request to submit a bid with Freightliner trucks because we had a copy of an addendum from the prior year where the question was asked of the City of Kawartha Lakes, and it come back negative. So we decided we're going to submit a bid anyhow. Our bid came in at just over $51,000 lower than the bid from International. That's $8,514 per unit, which in my book is pretty substantial money. We need to look after every dollar of the taxpayers' money. So I see by the minutes of the agenda that Todd Bryant has recommended the acceptance of the bid from International Trucks, and that doesn't make me a happy taxpayer. I don't think it's fair to the people of the City of Kawartha Lakes. My particular circumstance, I got more money than I need, so that doesn't worry me. The specifications on the request for quote were built specifically for an International truck. I've got a whole list of examples, but some of them I will try to go through quickly. They request 12 switches in the dash for various operations of lights and equipment on the plow unit. I'm pretty well connected in the industry because I am semi-retired. I'm just helping my son out because he has taken over for me. But they request 12 switches in the dash for plow equipment. The maximum the City of Kawartha Lakes has used in any of their plow trucks is 7. Now, the reason they requested 12, because the International truck sells their switch banks 6 at a time. So International can't supply 7 or 8 or 9. They got to supply 6 or 12. Freightliner can also supply 12 switches. It's an additional cost to us and the taxpayer. However, there's going to be a lot of spare switches that aren't used. It also causes us to not make available some of the items that the drivers would like in the trucks. Another example, on the single axle units, they requested a 31,000-pound rear suspension in a single axle truck. The laws in Ontario are, on a single axle truck, which is really 2 axles, there's a front axle and a rear axle, but it's called a single axle truck. The maximum weight you can carry on that truck on the rear axles is 10,000 kgs or 22,000 pounds. You go 1 pound over that weight rating, you're breaking the law. With an overloaded truck, if the truck was to have a collision, the liability falls on the City of Kawartha Lakes and hence trickles down to the taxpayer where we pay. Also, in an unloaded state, having a 31,000-pound rear suspension single axle truck, if the truck was doing any speed, the possibility exists the truck could hit a bump, and because the suspension is so stiff and rigid that it could skew the truck in a sideward motion and the driver lose control and you have an accident on your hands. So Freightliner can supply 31,000-pound axles, but it's relegated to emergency equipment and fire trucks. The plow truck does not qualify for it, so our answer to that particular question in the request for quote is no. There's a reason for everything in life. Horsepower requirements requested in the tender specific to International. We can supply more horsepower or less, but we bid more horsepower. There's a penalty clause of $100 a day per unit for a late delivery, a date that we would specify. We declined to agree to that issue. With what's going on in the world right now with coronavirus, a lot of components are made in China. This virus has the potential to shut down the whole auto industry, cars and everything. So anybody any manufacturer in the right mind is not going to agree to a penalty clause with the climate that we're dealing at the moment.
I just ask you to wrap it up, Mr. Clark, please.
Okay. There's a whole list of items in the request for proposal, but I'll just sum it up. Death, taxes, and change are about the only constants in life. We can't do much about death, but taxes and change, we can do something about it, and I'm requesting that you support us and take a second look at the awarding of this request for quote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. If you just want to stay there for a minute, we'll see if there's any questions for you. I'll just ask for a motion to receive the deputation and the correspondence that was part of the deputation. Councillor Ashmore and O'Reilly. Are there any questions for the deputant? Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the deputant, thank you for coming. One of the rationales for, I guess, standardizing equipment is that as we do repairs to our own equipment, it means we don't have to stock a multiple of parts. Are there a lot of parts that are common to Freightliner and International and other trucks, or are they all unique?
Excellent question. No, there are many, many, many common parts between different truck manufacturers. driveline system, brakes, tires, many. Most of them are common to most truck manufacturers. And as far as serviceability goes, there is an authorized location in Peterborough. It happens to be 650 meters away from the dealership that you in the past have awarded your trucks to. And as far as you buy parts from that Freightliner dealer already, I know for a fact that a Freightliner dealer at Oshawa does your mobile e-testing. So you do deal with the Freightliner organization already. And you're not going to save a whole lot of money in parts and inventory or training. Trucks change year after year after year. Software goes out of date. Your technicians, you guys are no different than any other municipality or private garage or a truck dealership. You cannot get qualified people to work on equipment nowadays. And the big components like the engine, the Allison automatic transmission, your guys aren't going to do that repair work anyhow. They don't have the knowledge to do it, they don't have the specialized equipment to do it, and it's not worthwhile. You need to farm that stuff out, which you already do.
Thank you. What about other things like sand spreaders, salt spreaders, plows? Are they unique to each individual truck, or are they common?
No, the exact same plow gear, sander sander equipment, computer for the application rate for the salters is exactly the same, whether it's going an international truck, a Freightliner truck, a Peterbilt truck. It's all the same plow gear.
Okay, thank you for that. And what about warranties on these vehicles? How long is a standard warranty? When a municipality buys one, what can they expect in terms of warranties?
Okay, the base warranty on the truck chassis itself is 1 year. However, all the components in the truck are warranted by the specific manufacturer of that item. For example, a Meritor axle, depending on which vocation the truck is in, it'll be covered for 5 years or 7 years. The engine would have a 2-year standard warranty available on it. The transmission would have a 2-year standard warranty. There are additional warranties for sale on just about every component in the truck. You could spend another $100,000 just buying extended warranties on trucks, but it's like life insurance. I've been paying it most of my life. I haven't got my monies out of it yet. And you probably won't when you're buying 6 trucks. If you're an individual buying 1 truck, yeah, buy some warranty. When you have multiple vehicles, the bang for the dollar is not there.
Okay, thank you. We hope you don't have to collect on your life insurance as well. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive the deputation of the correspondence. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you for coming. We're going to deal with the report a little later. If you can hang around for a bit, we'll go from there. Thank you. Okay, we'll move into item 7, which is presentations. Item 7.1, we have a rural zoning bylaw consolidation update. And this is regarding item 9.1.1 on the agenda, which is extracted as well. Richard Hawley, Manager of Planning, and Bobby Gauthier, Senior Project Manager from WSP. Welcome, gentlemen. Good afternoon. And Janet Wong, who we know did all the real work.
Good afternoon, that's correct. We're pleased to have this presentation for you. We've been working on a lot of this work, and we hired Bobby Gauthier of WSP last year. The project kicked off, sort of really started to get kicked off in the May-June timeframe, and we've had a number of public open houses. So without further ado, I'll have Bobby Gauthier come up and give you the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Your Worship, members of council, and members of the public in attendance. Did I say good evening? I meant good afternoon. I'm so used to presenting to councils in the evening. It's a force of habit, I think. So I don't have a very long presentation. It's maybe about 10 minutes or so. And I think the main purpose of it is to provide an update on where we're at in the process. So I'll start out with a bit of a refresher on the purpose of the project. I'll go over at a high level the timeline for completing this project. I've got a bit of a summary of the open houses that we held over the fall of last year. And then I will describe our discussion paper. I'll talk about the next major deliverable, which is our summary report, as well as our planned second round of consultation, a series of workshops in the spring. And then I'll introduce the project website and conclude with some next steps. And then, of course, I'm happy to take questions after that. So the purpose of the project fundamentally is about writing and developing a brand new zoning bylaw for the rural area of the city of Kawartha Lakes. So what this entails is a consolidation of 13 separate zoning bylaws that currently apply across the city, excluding the urban areas and excluding the Oak Ridges Moraine. Right now we're focusing on the rural area. One of the main purposes of this project is to implement the policies of the city's official plan. This is a requirement under the Planning Act. When we write a new zoning bylaw, we have to make sure that it conforms to the policies of the official plan. And of course, the city has a fairly recent official plan approved in, I think, about 2012. It's also an opportunity, I think, to implement a wide range of improvements to the zoning bylaw. You know, the zoning bylaws as they stand are pretty outdated. They've been amended many times over the years, and I think this is a great opportunity to consolidate the bylaws, update them, modernize them, make them more consistent with current development practice. It's a lot of opportunity here. And of course, the project is guided by a task force who helps to steer the project and provide us with direction. The timeline and the process for this project. So it is about a 2-year process. It is quite a significant undertaking. We started out in phase 1 of the process by conducting a series of public open houses. That was really the first step in the project. We got out to the public, we had 4 public open houses, and we introduced the project to people and started to get their input on some of the issues to be addressed in this important exercise. And then we wrote a discussion paper. I believe that's attached to the council agenda today. And I'm here to provide essentially an introduction to that discussion paper and largely wrap up stage 1 of our work program. After today, we'll start to move into stage 2, in which we will develop a summary report, a second deliverable before writing the zoning bylaw. We're planning to have a series of community workshops in the spring. We'll be releasing the first draft of the zoning bylaw towards the end of the summer of this year, and another round of public open houses so that people have an opportunity to comment on that significant deliverable. After that, we'll be doing a second draft zoning bylaw, and I'll be back here for another update with council. And then we'll be working towards the final series of public meetings in early 2021, along with finalizing the bylaw for council's consideration to adopt by next fall. So our first round of public consultation occurred over the fall of last year. We had 4 open houses, and they were attended by about 80 people in total. And speaking from experience, I can tell you that is exceptional attendance. I've done zoning bylaws in very, very large cities with a tiny fraction of 80 people coming out. So I was very happy to see 80 people come out to our meetings. The purpose of the open houses was first to introduce the project. We wanted the open houses to represent sort of our formal kickoff of the project. We also began to seek input on key issues and opportunities to be addressed, and it was also an opportunity to speak one-on-one with myself and with city staff at the meetings. If you take a look at the discussion paper, you'll find a more detailed summary of some of the input that we received at those meetings. So the discussion paper is our first major deliverable in this process. It's been completed in draft and released now for public input. The discussion paper does a few things. Firstly, it encompasses a review of guiding policy and legislation. So it takes a look at your current zoning bylaws, it takes a look at your official plan, and it starts to assess what the differences are. You know, your official plan gives policy direction. How does that differ from your current regulatory framework? It's kind of a good introduction to zoning. It talks about some some different approaches to zoning, how we can write a user-friendly zoning bylaw. Many municipalities in the province are currently doing zoning bylaw reviews at the moment. I would say probably in the order of 40 to 50 municipalities doing it right now. There's a lot of them going on. We looked at the differences between the zoning and the official plan. We set out some guiding principles to write the new zoning bylaw, and we started to assess some of the key issues involved in writing the new zoning bylaw. So our next major deliverable is what we call the summary report, and I think we might change the title of the report, but for now we're calling it the summary report. Having done some of the initial consultation and having drafted the discussion paper, I think that there are a few issues that we want to explore in a bit more detail based on some of the input we've heard. So number one is we want to lay out in more specific terms what the methodology is going to be for bringing these 13 bylaws together. That's kind of number one. We also want to look in more detail at what we're going to do about site-specific exception zones. So the city has, of course, passed hundreds of exception zones over the years. We want a methodology for reviewing and dealing with those. We want also to look at potential policy updates that could be considered concurrently with the zoning bylaw review. So going through this process, city staff have identified the need perhaps to elaborate on certain policies of the official plan, and I think there's an opportunity for the city to conduct a policy update concurrently with the zoning bylaw. So we'll start to look at that. And then finally, we'll look at how to address certain key policies of the official plan. Policies regarding waterfront areas, shoreline development, as well as agricultural areas, I think are very key policy topics that we want to explore in detail. So we want to get into those things in this next summary report. Our intent is to have a series of workshops in the spring to seek input on these in-depth topics. So in terms of the project website, the city has set up a website. You can see it linked at the top right. That's I would say, the main page for the project. It's where people can find contact information, and you can submit comments, and we're of course accepting written comments at any time in this process. WSP, my firm, has also created a website, kawarthalakeszoning.ca. I would certainly invite people to check it out. We've created an interactive map where you can click on a property and you can identify the zoning for a property. So it's quite an interesting interactive website that allows people to participate in this process. And of course, we'll be updating and maintaining the websites over the course of the entire project. So finally, some next steps. So we'll be looking to complete the summary report over the spring. We'll finalize the discussion paper based on any comments we receive. Our intent is to hold a series of about 3 workshops towards the end of the spring. And we are targeting the end of summer to release the first draft zoning bylaw, and that will occur in conjunction with a series of public open houses towards the end of the summer, early fall. And of course, if there's any questions or any input anybody wants to provide, Richard, his contact information is noted, and he's the main contact for this project. So, Mr. Mayor, that concludes the presentation.
Great, thank you. We do have a couple questions, so I'll get a motion to receive the presentation first. Councillor Helmsley and O'Reilly. Councillor Helmsley, you have a question? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Thank you for the presentation and the work to date. Certainly something I've been pushing for some number of years, and I'm pleased to see it's finally getting some traction. So when you do your public meetings, are they going to be like a PIC, or are they going to be interactive? Will there be a presentation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. So we're planning for a series of workshops towards the end of the spring, and I actually see them being much more interactive discussions where we sit down with the public and we conduct more of a workshop component. I could see there being a presentation as part of that as well. I would expect also when we release the first draft bylaw and conduct consultation early fall, we'll be doing, I think, more in-depth open houses with presentations involved.
Great, because I can tell you that putting up storyboards and having people walk around causes some confusion in the, out there, and people don't care for that kind of they like a presentation and they like to be interactive, so I would encourage that. You said that these are for the rural areas, not for the urban areas. When you say rural areas and not urban, are you including places like Cobeconk and Fenelon and Bobcaygeon? They are considered rural areas?
Some of them are. So we're basing this off of the official plan. So anything identified as a more substantial urban settlement area is not included in this. I don't have the list in front of me. Perhaps city staff knows it a little bit better off the top of their head.
So just, so Lindsay, Bobcaygeon, Fenelon Falls, Omemee, and Woodville are not included in this work, but all the other hamlets would be.
As you know, we have a couple of issues, certainly in Fenelon, Lindsay Street being one of them, that I would like to get included, but is that going to be down the road, or is that, how are we going to manage those?
Certainly through the mayor. So those would be part of a phase 2 work program once the secondary plans are approved. Then we can actually go and do the zoning bylaw updates for those urban areas as well.
That was my next question. How does the fact that the secondary plans are still in front of the LPAT, how does that affect what we're doing here?
The fact that secondary plans are in front of the LPAT doesn't affect the rural zoning bylaw at all. It just means that the urban bylaws will be a phase 2 work plan, but it doesn't affect the rural zoning bylaws at all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Reilly?
Thanks very much. And just that one small line, you're going to consolidate 13 rural bylaws. Good luck. I look forward to seeing how that all works out, and I'm sure it's going to be a huge challenge for everyone, but look forward to it. I met with Janet Wong yesterday on had a number of questions, so I won't take up a lot of your time today, but I did notice that one of the statements in it was that it seems like, not saying necessarily out of sync, but the provincial policy statement and our official plan may not be totally aligned. And going forward, how do you see us working on that or aligning it to the provincial policy? And would you see it doing through amendments, or would you see it doing through, how would you see us doing that?
Sure, through you, Mr. Mayor. So certainly true, and it's a little bit hard to keep local policy up to date with provincial policy because it seems to change on an annual basis. I could certainly see that the city processing amendments to the official plan concurrently with the zoning bylaw moving forward. So the city to date has expressed some interest to me in updating policies as they relate to agricultural areas in particular, on-farm diversified uses and agriculture-related uses. Currently, for example, the official plan, it doesn't use the same terminology as the PPS. It refers to agricultural-related uses, but it's actually talking about on-farm diversified uses. So I think there's going to be a need to make some policy updates. Otherwise, our hands are a little bit tied because when we move the zoning bylaw forward, we have to make sure that it conforms to the official plan. So for us to bring it into conformity with the broader provincial policy, the city's going to have to update its official plan in conjunction. So I could see there being, one amendment, perhaps touching on a bunch of different issues that we've been exploring through this process so far.
Yes, and we were also on a number of positive comments around minor variances. I know members of the committee of adjustment are here too, and they would certainly welcome some considerations, we'll put it that way, in the committee in the minor variances. The other issue was there was a number of discussions around hamlets.
Councillor, we're getting into the report. Can I ask you just to save that for the report? I know the consultant can't stick around, but our staff are here to answer anything regarding the report. If you can just keep your questions right now, if you don't mind, on the process and everything else, then I think we're probably in a better position to move forward.
Will the staff answer the ones on hamlets?
They will.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay. Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Through you to Deputy Net. My question is just with the whole speed of the whole process. So people have asked me when I was at the Downeyville meeting, like, why does it take 2 years to do this? But if we come to the end of next year, will that take another year to get the secondary plans and official plans, get everybody get their act together? And because what I'm trying to say is that you've got developers that they're in the queue, they want to get going, but when they see that we can't get this, it takes us 2 years to amalgamate bylaws. Like I can just speak for Emily Omimi. Like Omimi's in the so-called urban area, but then you've got Emily Township, former Emily Township right beside it, and you've got buildings that, or development that wants to go into, they almost straddle each other, right? So they can't go ahead, and there's difficulties going ahead with this, and we're waiting for a year, and then it could be another year after that. So I guess my question is, like, is it definitely has to be another year and a half? Like when will we be actually see some action where developers can get going on projects that they've been waiting for years for this to all be consolidated?
Sure, through you, Mr. Mayor. You know, we've certainly explored opportunities for potentially streamlining the process, but it is quite difficult just because of A, the amount of work involved, but also B, because we want to make sure that we're getting out to the public at key milestones in the process. So there is kind of limited opportunity to further streamline or compress the schedule for this project. And I can tell you from experience that this is pretty typical. You know, for a comprehensive review to take a couple of years at least. So, having said that, though, this project I don't think necessarily has to stall or delay the submission of a site-specific development application. That can still certainly occur. So the city can still process applications for development even while the zoning bylaw review is being carried out.
Okay, just one more question. So that's good. So that means that we can still develop, but we don't have to wait till the end of this thing is, the study is done?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, the city will accept a zoning bylaw amendment application at any time.
That's fine.
We've been developing for 19 years as a city, so, you know, it's a little more complicated. I think which leads to my question. So what's the main goal that we're trying to accomplish by consolidating the rural zoning bylaws? Do we want to simplify things for our staff when they're trying to interpret something? Or is the main goal here to make it easier for, as the councillor said, for our residents who want to do a project or want to develop, easier to understand and to sort of simplify that process a little bit on their end? I'm hoping you say both, but I'll ask you that question.
I'll say absolutely both. I think there are actually quite a number of different objectives in this process. The first that we've heard a lot about from the public is the fact that these different former municipalities are subject to different bylaws, but they're actually subject to the same official plan. They're subject to the same policies. And because you have different bylaws, different people trying to do the same thing are subject to different regulations. So one of the, I think, benefits of this process is that we're going to create equity across the city. If you're subject to the same designation in the official plan, you'll now be subject essentially to the same regulations. So we're going to apply the same standards across the city, and I think that's going to reduce a lot of frustration that people have had with the bylaws. And certainly to your points, there's going to be a ton of cost savings with respect to staff time, trying to administer 13 bylaws versus 1. I think that's going to be a huge improvement for staff, and it's going to be a huge improvement for residents. You know, we're also looking at, you know, the interactive map that we created. We want to see the possibility of that being administered by the city over the long term so that people can have the ability to check their zoning on their own from home. And that's going to save a lot of time with respect to, you know, customer service inquiries and that sort of thing. And then, of course, bringing the bylaw into conformity with policy is a very important objective of the study as well.
Awesome, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Riley, you had a follow-up?
Yes, you said the report's going to come, first draft zoning bylaws coming out in the summer. I think that's when everybody's going to really see the rubber hit the road and people have an idea what's really going to happen. Are we hoping to have that out so that we have a large cottage population before sometime in August, so they would have an opportunity as well?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our target is to try to get it out by about mid-August and to start holding the next round of consultation at the end of August and then into early September. So we're trying to capture that cottage crowd as well.
Great. Any further questions? Seeing none, we have a motion. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it very much. Okay, we'll just, we'll deal with the report, but we got to do committee of the whole first. So item 8.1, we have an extraction, sorry, getting ahead of myself, that the minutes of the February 4th, 2020 committee of the whole meeting be received and the recommendations included in section 8.3 of the agenda, save and accept 836, the cultural master plan, which has been extracted, be adopted. Are there any other extractions for committee of the whole? Seeing none, can I get that motion, please? Councillor Richardson and Dunn. All in favor? That's passed. Councillor Ashmore, you extracted report ED 220-005, cultural master plan. Go ahead, sir.
That's right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what I wanted to propose is the following. I'm all for the cultural master plan. No problem with that, but I just wanted to add a further that a business plan be presented to council prior to budget deliberations. And I was just looking for a second or even for a discussion, if I could, please.
Councillor O'Reilly, go ahead.
You got a seconder? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so what I think we should see, like I said, I'm all in favor of this cultural master plan. It's a great idea. But we need to see the numbers before we come to budget. I mean, when we commit today, we're basically committing to a multi-million-dollar project. So we have to see something. I mean, even if the proponents can put something together or staff can put something together, it just shows to the taxpayers that we're at least looking at what the cost of this cultural master plan is going to be. It's going to pass, but I mean, I think just to be, to do our due diligence, we need to at least show the people that we've looked at some figures and, this is going to work. It's not going to be something that's going to be, spent out of control. So I just think it should be something that should be added to this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Riley, do you want to speak to it? No. I'm just going to ask the CAO to clarify because I don't believe we're committing to a full budget and implementation. I think it was pretty clear in the master plan that as these steps go through it, each item will come forward to budget for approval each year. But I wonder if you could just clarify.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, sort of what you said. Yep. But no, my understanding was that this is really a blueprint in terms of overall the cultural programming sort of throughout the city. It doesn't commit you to budget. And in fact, in the motion that was recommended, it does specifically say that staff will bring forward through council any action items during the annual budget processes. So the intent was, if that master plan is recommending certain investments in the sector from us, then those would be highlighted in the annual budget process. There may be some confusion or crossover with the Cultural Center Task Force, which is a group that is now going to be going out doing a feasibility study on a actual cultural facility or facilities. That will have costing associated with it and a more sort of direct pro forma, if you will, on what that investment might be. But for the purpose of this, it would be, in my opinion, virtually impossible to cost out a 10-year cultural master plan in its entirety. It really requires you to make decisions sort of incrementally, and we'll cost those out as the budget process goes.
Thank you. I don't think it's necessary. I think we're covered in the master plan, but is there any other questions? Councillor Helmsley, you're good? Do you want to sum up, or?
Yeah, no, I just think that when it says here, the last action items for consideration through the annual budget process, so the budget starts in November. So we can't just come to the budget and here we're going to be asked to approve, could be $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, and we have no business plan in front of us. So we are going to be asked to approve a significant amount of money come budget time, so the capital budget. So I just think that we should have something started now so we'd have it ready by November. That's just all I was asking for. It doesn't have to be an elaborate business plan, but I think these two groups have to work together because you know, we're talking big money here, and we just need to put something together just to show the public that we're cognizant of spending money here, and the amount of money that we're going to spend. Not that I'm not against it, but I'm against it, but I mean, it's just something that we should do our due diligence and at least have something together before we start the budget process. That's the whole premise behind this.
Thank you. So the motion is as printed, except you added that a business plan be presented prior to budget. Recorded vote requested by Councillor Ashmore. Madam Clerk?
Councillor Ashmore?
In favor?
Councillor Dunn? Councillor Vale?
Opposed.
Deputy Mayor O'Reilly? Councillor Elmsley? Councillor Richardson? Mayor Letham?
Opposed. Motion fails, 1 to 6, 1 in favor, 6 opposed. Can I get a motion for the original recommendation that the cultural master plan be received, that council approve the cultural master plan as outlined in Appendix A to report, and that staff bring forward to council implementation action items for consideration through the annual budget process? Councillor Richardson and Elmsley, all in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Okay, that's our committee of the whole, so we'll move over to consent matters. Councillor Richardson, you have consent. So far in extractions, I have 911, rural zoning bylaw consolidation and update. We've got a few questions. I've extracted that. And 912, the request for quotation, supply and delivery of 2 single axle and 4 tandem axle trucks. I've extracted that as well. Are there any other extractions from the consent? Seeing none, Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, and through you, moved by myself, Councillor Richardson, seconded by Councillor Riley, that all the proposed resolutions shown in section 9.1 and 9.2 of the agenda be approved and adopted by council in the order that they appear on the agenda, and I can't even say that today, numbered, save, and except for the items 9.11, 9.12.
Thank you. All in favor? That's passed. Item 911, I've extracted it really just for discussion. It's really just that the plan be received. So if we can get that motion, we can ask some questions. Councillor O'Reilly and Vale. Councillor Vale, you're on the task force, correct? You're the council representative on the task force, so we can ask you lots of questions? Perfect. Questions? Councillor Elmsley, you had a couple. Do you want to start us off, or? You asked them? You're good? Okay. Councillor O'Reilly, you had a question that we referred to the report. Go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Richard. Richard, they talked a little bit about Hamlet, about the Hamlets, about an expansion of Hamlets, or maybe the suggestion that maybe we can have greater density in Hamlets, or we talk about the expansion of boundaries of Hamlets.
Through the mayor, I think the discussion is to make sure that our hamlet boundaries that we have in the zoning bylaws align with what we have shown in our official plan. So the official plan shows the limits for hamlets, and there may be some instances where they're not quite lining up. So we would be looking to make sure that what we've zoned actually lines up with the official plan hamlet boundaries.
Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Through you to Richard. My question is, well, I've raised it before, was how long it's going to take. We went through the development charges bylaw, and it was basically about less than a year, I think it took to come to a decision, and everybody, the developers got together, some members of council, the mayor was on it, and it was completed within, I think, within a year, so, which was great. But this one here is going to be, I know it's more involved, but how much more involved is it compared to the development charges task force? The rural zoning bylaw consolidation? Like, can you compare the two, or is it just like twice the amount of work, or 3 times the amount of work that's involved? Is that why it's going to take the full 2 years instead of like 1 year?
Through the mayor to the councillor, I think there are different kinds of processes. I think with the Development Charges Task Force, we had a certain time frame within which we had to have a new bylaw. So I think there was a time constraint on that. The second issue is that they are a little different in that we've got a lot of statutory touch points, and we've also got some open houses that we want to have with some presentations. So I think they're sort of different processes. I think the bottom line is we want to give as many opportunities for the public to view the different variations of the zoning bylaws, just so that we don't really we try to minimize the number of appeals. Hopefully we don't get any appeals. Our consultant has done some zoning bylaws where they haven't had any appeals, so it's what we're ultimately hoping for as well.
Councillor Riley?
So just so I understand, the consultant's going to guarantee us there's not going to be any appeals, is that as I interpret that? A question on the community workshops. How do you see, who do you see sitting on the community workshops?
So the workshops that we're looking at is, we're looking at doing a waterfront workshop and an agricultural workshop. So those are two really big points that came out of our open houses and some of the work that we've done. It's also, I think those are the two biggest touch points that have come out of our analysis so far of minor variances as well and applications. So we think those are some big areas where we need to focus our efforts on in terms of the open houses. We will be inviting a lot of people to these. We've got mailing lists that are already developed. We have a lot of interest from different people on the different topics, so we'll be sending out information to those people and doing an advertising blitz on those. We think those are two really big points that we need to have more outreach on for this zoning bylaw.
I'm glad you're not going to have them on Corey's, because that's always really troubling.
Any further questions? I've got a couple, Richard, if you don't mind. I don't know if you have it. At page 117, you talk about a review of definitions in conjunction with permitted uses. And when you talk about that, are you talking about, as part of this review, we're going to try to minimize, I guess, listing the individual uses? I know in some of our zoning we have, you can sell coffee, but you can't sell ice cream, so some of them are really crazy when you get right down to individual uses that were listed where somebody applied for a specific use, 20, 30 years ago, and when somebody moves in and says, oh, I'm going to change the use to this, all of a sudden they're not in compliance with the zoning. So is the goal to simplify that process where retail is retail and, if it falls within a general scope of retail, are we trying to get away from these individual uses and just generalize it more? Is that part of the plan?
Yes, it is. Well, first of all, we want to standardize definitions. We feel that some of the areas where the zoning bylaws are weak is that the definitions aren't as crisp as they really should be. And we have a lot of use terminology in the zoning bylaw that's not defined. So there's a lot of vagueness there. So we want to tighten that up, but we also want to make sure that we're not scoping the uses down so fine that, as you say, every single thing that you want to do, you have to come in for a variance. So we are trying to, within certain zone categories, make it a little bit broader so it's a little bit more user-friendly and easier to navigate, and you can turn over different types of uses and not have to come back over and over again.
So I'm a little confused. You said in the one sentence, we want to scope it down, but we want to make broader definitions. So can you just, when you say scope it down to a finer definition, more definitive, to me that's, we're trying to make it more general and easier to navigate when somebody, looks at a retail unit. Am I misrepresenting you?
Yeah, we are trying to make the use categories broader, right? But make sure that all the uses have definitions associated, so there's no vagueness there.
Okay, so when somebody's in retail, then an area should be zoned retail for any type of retail, not only specific individual uses, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, perfect. On page 140, it talks about legal non-conforming and non-compliance. Is that, as a result of doing this, will that continue? I'm assuming that if somebody's has a non-conforming building, you know, from years and years and years ago, that consolidating our rural zoning bylaw, that's not going to change. They're not going to be put into a situation, where they have to get a rezoning. That kind of definition will continue through the process?
That's correct, yes.
Sorry, 161. Talks about, I guess it goes back to the broad definition, talks about cannabis-related uses in rural zoning, and cannabis growing uses could be captured as an agricultural operation which is broadly permitted in various agricultural zones. This approach is beneficial if it's the city's direction to permit the use more broadly across the city. Should the city desire limiting the use to certain areas or zones, then the use would need to be defined explicitly so that permissions can be clearly established. So I guess, again, that goes back to the definitions part, but they're kind of asking a lot of questions. I mean, do we have direction there, or are we getting that direction from our task force, from residents? I mean, there's two different concepts there. We either include it as agriculture. If you're a farmer, we don't tell you what kind of crops to grow. Or are we going to say, you know, you can grow cannabis as part of agriculture, but only in specific areas? Are we looking to control that, or are we looking to keep that as general as possible?
Certainly, we're looking for direction from the task force on that. And when the zoning bylaw comes forward to obviously the Planning Advisory Committee and Council in its draft forms, that's when we're also going to be looking to yourself for guidance on that. You know, should it be a broad permission? Should it be controlled somewhat, or level of control will be up for further discussion?
So that decision will be made as part of this process?
That's correct.
Perfect, thank you. Page 169, it talks about conservation authorities, regulation limit as an overlay. Is that, you know, it looks like they're contemplating giving them more authority in the Planning Act and some of the zoning. Is that again a discussion that'll be had with the task force, and a decision will be made on the role of the conservation authorities in our consolidated rural zoning as well?
That's correct. So what that really refers to is having a bit of a user guide attached to the zoning bylaw that sort of provides information about other things that would apply to zoning that would be applicable if you were looking at some form of development. There's a number of things such as the regulated areas, MTO setbacks, things like that have an impact on development, but they're not necessarily approved under the Planning Act. So it's just additional information. It won't have an impact on the zoning bylaws, though.
Sorry, could you say that last sentence again?
It's there for information purposes only, but it won't impact the zoning bylaw.
Thank you. And then my final question on page 180 regarding buffers. There's a great, I don't know if this is the right area, but there's a great part in here that talks about minor variances, and you know, that if a certain area has seen a history of minor variances related to setbacks or something, and you know, they're traditionally being granted, will this zoning bylaw, I'm assuming, and I think what it says is you're going to look at changing the zoning so that if we're traditionally granting a lot of these setbacks, maybe we can change the zoning so that they don't have to go through that process to continue to do that, if the history is there in certain specific areas or certain cases. Can you confirm that? Because I think that's a great idea.
Certainly, water setbacks are a key issue, and we were just talking about that this morning. We're going to be analyzing a lot of data in terms of what the variances that we've had are for, so our variance history. But we're also going to go around the lakes and take a look at different areas and looking at different lotting characteristics to sort of see, you know, for example, you might have lots with X number of depth. They can have a 15-meter setback, for example. Or lots that are shallower, we may look at something a little different, or lots that are deeper might have a different sort of setback. It is a huge issue that we're looking at because, as you say, we've had a lot of variances. So we are looking to see what we can do to streamline that process.
Okay, and that's all I have, and thank you. It's a great document. I look forward to the information. I just want to touch on Councillor Ashmore's comment, and although I, would love to have seen this done 10 years ago, this is a really important piece of paper that we're putting together here in the city for the future. So as much as I'd like to say, let's hurry up and get this done, let's take our time, let's make sure we do this properly, let's make sure that our staff are engaged and they're coming forward with, their thoughts and ideas, and everybody's part of that process, so that when we do it, we get it right, and hopefully makes things easier for everybody moving forward for the next 20, 30, 40 years. So as much as I'd like to see us rush along and do it, I respect that, but more importantly, let's make sure we get it right so that we're going ahead. So thank you. Councillor Ashmore, you had a question?
Through you to Richard. So after, say it comes to council in 2 years from now, after it's finished at the end of 2021, it would come to council early 2022. So how long does it go? Does it go to the province? They have to okay that, so we have to change our official plan after that in order for this to come into effect? What's the timing with the official plan after that?
Through the mayor to the councillor, the hope is that this zoning bylaw conforms with the official plan, so that we don't have to make any further changes to the official plan. And once the zoning bylaw goes through its appeal period, then it's in force. That's the ultimate game plan, is to hopefully have no appeals on that, optimistically speaking. So then it would be in force, and then it would be everyone in the rural areas could then use the zoning bylaw.
Thanks. And just my last question. On page 187, it says, maple syrup bushes should not be designated as woodlands in the official plan and/or not restricted as an environmental feature. Are we designating where people can have their maple sugar bush, or I'm not sure about this here, because are we telling farm owners, rural property owners where they can tap trees, basically?
No, we're not.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure. Okay, that's fine. It's just wanted to clarify that. So you're not telling agricultural operators like where to farm and what to farm or what crops to grow, like the mayor mentioned there. But I just seen this about tapping in woodlands. Like would you be triggering like conservation authority and all that if you did that with this new document?
No, we wouldn't. That was a specific comment that came up in Cobeconk. There was a gentleman that has been tapping trees for decades, and he was concerned that the natural features mapping in the official plan was going to prohibit that, and we said, no, it doesn't. It just shows the areas where we have large stands of trees. But no, this zoning bylaw won't prohibit that.
Okay. You just want that for clarity? Yeah. Any further questions on the rural zoning bylaw consolidation update? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Presentation today and bringing us up to date. And I know you've been working on this, Janet. Thank you for all your work, and a lot of others too, so thanks. Okay, we'll move into item 9.1.2, which is the other extraction regarding the supply and delivery of 2 single axle and 4 tandem axle trucks. We had a deputation earlier which raised a few questions, so I'm just going to turn it over to Director Robinson. Maybe he can answer some of those questions that were brought up and comments that were made from the deputant, and just give us an overview of the process regarding our trucks right now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through council, I'll start off with a bit of a high-level overview, and then I'll ask Manager Todd Bryant to step up and fill in a little bit more detail. From a high level, the deputant is right. We did start back, I can't remember the exact year, but we did a high-level review through a Lean Six Sigma project to try to drive efficiencies within our operations group. From that, we developed several documents, including the management directive and the policy related to non-emergency fleet. Within that, it drove a lot of efficiencies and cost savings into our operation. From there, we developed a specification that really enables both MAC and International to bid and meet with some modifications to their equipment. That specification has been rolled out and tendered out on multiple occasions in the past. We received bids from both MAC and International for the past 4 years, with the exception of last year when MAC did not take documents. They have, in the past, International has been successful, low bid on multiple occasions. Currently, our fleet is about a quarter MAC and 3/4 International, so again, we still have a blend of those pieces of equipment. A piece of it is cost in inventory, so if we currently do about 95% of our operational maintenance on our fleet, on our plow truck equipment in-house. So the comment about farming it out and we do that work anyways, that's not true. We do 95% of that work in-house. So if we were to bring those, another piece of equipment, a Freightliner, whatever in-house, it would force us to increase our inventory of that, of those parts, so it would generate and drive additional costs into our operation. So that's kind of at a very high level why we have the specifications created the way we do. All tenders that we receive are required to modify equipment in some fashion to meet our specific needs for our equipment. So it doesn't matter whether it's international MAC, there are some allowances. With respect to MAC in this particular case, that's something that we can take away, review with MAC, and ensure that we have processes dealt with for future tenders. But I just wanted to, I guess, kick it over to Todd to fill in some more specifics related to this process.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to members of council, kind of forgive my voice, I'm a little bit froggy today. There's a number of things that we specify directly for our operations when it comes to the equipment that we look for. Our specification list is very broad, but it's also very specific, and it's not specific to any one particular item. There's a number of items. And a couple of examples that I'll give you are when it comes to, for example, our fuel tanks. We specify a 100-gallon fuel tank on our plow trucks. This is because all of our routes require that our vehicles are out there for a certain period of time, and if they have a smaller fuel tank, then they have to come back in halfway through their route, and they might not meet their minimum maintenance standards. And both MAC and International, our current suppliers, they have to go out and procure these things. Another item that we look for particularly is we specify that our battery box be on the passenger side of our vehicle. Every year we have about 75 to 125 service calls. We don't want any of our staff working in the roadway. We want them working off to the side of the road. So it's a safety issue. For us to modify a battery box, we have to do three things. We have to, first off, we have to see if there's room for it on these trucks. A lot of the time right now, our equipment is so compacted now with EGR systems and all of the other subsystems that go along with it, there isn't room to make the modification. The second thing is if we can make the modification, then it's very costly to fabricate up the equipment, to change all the wiring looms, those types of things. So these are some of the reasons why we make our specifications the way that they are, so that we can have them a certain way. Our operators know that they are a very certain and specific way, and that our operations can take place in a timely manner so that we can meet our minimum maintenance standards. And those are just two examples of literally dozens for the rationale why we do what we do when it comes to specifications.
So I guess through you, Mayor, there's a laundry list. So Todd highlighted a couple of them. There's about 15 or 20 just within this that Todd can go through case by case by case. Staff are ultimately recommending the report as written. We have, the deputant before had mentioned that their quotation had come in under the lower than, but was disqualified because it wasn't able to meet specifications. I will note that the numbers that were read weren't the full price. The numbers that were read were the core, and then there was optionals. The optional numbers, or the optional prices, were included in the international bid. They were not included in the Freightliner tender, which would actually drive it almost $450,000 above the other price. So it's still the low bid, the international bid, even if you look at it, everything all equal. even though the Freightliner was disqualified for not meeting specifications, which I still agree with. Ultimately, staff are recommending the award as written, and I think it's the best solution, ultimately moving the municipality forward.
Thank you. So, brings up a question that I have regarding the optional equipment, and maybe a question for you, Todd. I'm a little bit confused on, so a couple things. You've requested a base piece of equipment plus optional items. Features automatic tire chain, heated windshield, hard docks, dump body, and tailgate for 2 single axle plows, blah, blah, blah. So you've got some optional equipment you asked to be priced separately, but they both put in their tenders, including the optional equipment, and it came in over budget. So what was the rationale for asking for the optional equipment to be tendered separate or priced separately as opposed to part of a package price that you were looking for? I would assume it was budget related, but you've included everything and come in over budget. So I'm struggling a little bit to figure out how you put all that together.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the 2 items that are optional equipment that we were looking for pricing on in particular was the on-spots that you just talked about that were $3,800 each, plus the heated windshields. And those 2 optional items came out to about $9,820 extra. And I included them in on advice from me and my staff, because we were already $26,000 over our budget as it was and knew I'd have to come to council. That in turn also made me go internal to figure out where I can save that additional $36,000 on my other capital costs. So the 2 items, we can remove them. We can remove the on-spots, which are the automatic tire chains, and we can remove the heated windshields. And that'll save about almost $10,000, $9,820 off of the tender.
So the base pricing for these tenders was over budget before you factored in the optional items. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Helmsley, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to either Director Robinson or to Mr. Bryant, how many single axle trucks do we have in our fleet?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, currently we have 10 single axles in our fleet and 52 tandem axle trucks.
Okay. And what's the breakdown on them? I think you said 10% or 20% are international, or 80% are international and the rest are MAC. Is that correct?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, I asked Mr. Bryant for a breakdown. So we have 2 MAC single axles, we have 10 international single axles, we have 13 MAC tandems and 39 international. So it's about 15 to 49 ratio, so about a quarter MAC to 3/4 international.
And am I correct that you said MAC aren't quoting anymore, or they're not giving us quotes?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, they have quoted up to 2018. 2019, they did not take tender documents for one reason or another, whether they weren't aware or whether they hadn't been successful years prior, so they didn't bid. They did take documents this year, but they didn't provide a tender.
So we're really down to international versus international?
At the moment, the way that the 2020 bid closed out, international was the only submission. We plan to round back through purchasing and our group to ensure that we can reinstate them as a competitive tender for 2021.
And are there any international dealers within the city of Kawartha Lakes?
Through Mr. Mayor, I'm not aware. I don't think so.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, the closest one is in Peterborough.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
The closest dealership is in Peterborough.
In Peterborough. And MAC, are there MAC dealers in city of Kawartha Lakes?
No, there are not.
They're not. So there's not a whole lot of difference in price between one international dealer and another. I wouldn't imagine. It's probably like you buy a Buick or you buy a Buick, and the dealership, they're probably pretty close.
So my understanding through you, Mr. Mayor, is most of the dealerships have servicing areas, and there's kind of a mutual understanding between service dealers to not cross boundaries and bid on one another's territory. They're not defined, but it's a mutual understanding, which is typically why we get one bid from International, one bid from MAC, et cetera.
So really and truly, it's not a competitive bidding process. I mean, we're kind of a captive market.
Through Mr. Mayor, they are specialized pieces of equipment. There's not a lot of suppliers out there. We have generated and created the specification to generate that competitive market between MAC and International. And again, we're going to continue to work to promote and ensure that in future years we can have receive bids from both companies. In this current year, we only received the one bid from International.
And again last year as well.
Last year as well, yep. So in 2016, 17, 18, there was competitive bids for both companies. Last year, again, whether MAC chose not to bid because they've lost the prior 3 years and felt they weren't competitive, or whether they weren't aware of the tender opening, I'm not 100% sure why they didn't submit last year. They just did not take a package last year. So this year they took a package, and for for reasons stated, they hadn't submitted a bid. We'll work to rectify that in future years.
Am I correct in saying that it's been maybe 4 or 5 years since we did the black belt evaluation for this process? Is it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes. We started the process, the black belt was in 2012-13. And then we rolled out a number of improvements after that in 2016 as well.
Okay. I guess my question is, Mr. Mayor, through you, is it time to reevaluate that and maybe look at seeing if we can't see if we're still realizing the kinds of savings we think we are, and seeing if perhaps we should be in a more competitive situation?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, staff review the equipment specifications on a regular basis. Annually, Todd, Tom, and our managers get together, discuss what equipment's needed, whether we have cable wings, hydraulic wings, whether they have the automatic chain deployer or not. They look at all the specifications on a frequent basis, so it's not that everything's been sitting idle since 2013 and then idle since 16. We look at those and update the specifications regularly. We have generated or realized substantial savings from the refinement of our specifications, and not only that, seen a much more stable fleet on the road due to the capability of our all staff being able to maintain and repair all equipment that's on the road in a standardized fashion.
I would never accuse any of you of sitting idly by. I'm sure that you've studied the situation thoroughly. My only concern is that we have local suppliers of heavy equipment that are unable to bid in our process, and I'm trying to find a way that they could be included. Is it possible we could have a meeting with purchasing and see and relook at some of the numbers and see how we might do that?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we do that on a regular basis, and we will continue to do that and evaluate whether there is a fiscal benefit to including other equipment manufacturers into our process. At current and up to and including this tender, the specification that was put together is specific to MAC and International trucks. Again, if we want to look at third-party trucks, the cost-benefit analysis can be undertaken by staff and has been undertaken in the past, and it's proven to not warrant bringing those into the mix.
Mr. Mayor, could I, after we complete this, could I have a follow-up motion, please?
You bet. Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor
you.
Dunn? Yeah, Councillor Dunn, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick ones. I'm going to support this motion, and I'll put it, because bottom line is, when you compare apples to apples, the international bid was the lower bid, according to the report. So based on that alone, I'm going to support the motion. Having said that, I've got issues with specifications. Been on council long enough, and many of us have been, where rightly or wrongly, the specifications for fire trucks was so tight that only one company could actually bid on them. So and I'll just jump in and ask Todd a question. Why do you need 12 switches when you're only using up to 7? Is that something that was built in there to eliminate other competitors? And I agree. I don't think it was. I think, I do struggle with certain specifications being put in, going back to our problems with our fire trucks, where certain specifications were put in, and by virtue of the fact that those specifications were there, nobody was able to compete except for the one company down in Quebec, I think it was. So I am concerned about that, but maybe just for my own edification, if you can tell me why you needed a 12-switch panel when you only use 7.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, we currently use 7, yes. One of the things that roads operation is looking at is bringing in something called a mesh system, which will actually put a tablet, a separate GPS unit, and then a third reporting unit in it, so that we would need 10 for that. So hence the idea of making sure that if this mesh system does come into place, then we can retrofit our equipment properly.
Good answer. And that's all I ever need is a good answer. Thank you.
Thank you. So does this tender, does this scoping of these projects fall within our fleet policy, council-approved fleet policy?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it does, absolutely. The specifications are developed in accordance with the fleet policy and the management directive supporting that fleet policy.
Okay. And does the tender fall within our purchasing policy, the council-approved purchasing policy, Director? That's a yes. So I don't have, other than that, I guess my only concern, Todd, is I'm a little concerned at the way that the optional equipment was added to the tender and being over budget. And I won't speak for the rest of council, but to me, when something's over budget, council should be given an option to, here's the optional items, this is why we would like to have them, but recognizing we're over budget, if you choose not to go there, if they're needed, then they should just be part of the original tender. But if they're optional and they're not required, but nice to have, but you're over budget, I would like to see in the future council having an option to, either take a little extra out of the reserve if necessary, they're over, or just say, you know what, based on the budget this year, we should just stick to the basic this year, and we'll look at those optional items next year. So, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, you're right. And I'm going to kind of point back to Councillor Dunn just for a second, and I don't mean to single you out, but one of the things that I did do afterwards is I went back to my staff to figure out how we were going to scope down the rest of our projects so that we could ultimately come into budget overall. And while I realized that I should have done it this way, I knew that having worked with this council for the past 9 years that I would have to figure out where the money was going to come from somewhere else. So I just wanted to make sure that, just wanted you guys, the folks, make sure that I was working to save money somewhere else as well.
Yeah, no, and I respect that, Todd, and I think, this council's been very open to the fleet policy and the fleet budget. We're not debating here for an hour any longer about, what kind of tires are you putting on a pickup truck. I mean, we seem to have grown a little bit past that, and now we're looking at things from a bit of a bigger picture. So I think, but I also think when these tenders come back, with a budget that, if it's over budget, any options that we can put in place to keep it within budget just gives council that confidence, or gives me that confidence that, we're doing everything we can. So I don't have a motion. Thank you for that. Personally, I would propose we take the 9820 for the 2 optional items off the tender to try and bring it in a little more in line with budget, but what does council want to do? Up to you folks. Councillor Riley?
Can I ask a question, for example, the heated windshield? Is that something that's really needed on a plow truck? Do you think that's, I presume that you have it for a reason?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we use them particularly for our ice-up events, and as you know, the last number of years, we've had a lot of freezing rain events. Our plow trucks are out there for between 8 to 12 hours per shift, and the windshields do tend to fog and freeze. They do get used. They do get used frequently, particularly in the southern part of our city. So we do use them on a regular basis, probably a half a dozen times a year.
So what are the optional items, if we take off 9820 that you mentioned, what are the optional items we're removing from this tender?
You would be removing all the heated windshields on the 6 plow trucks, plus the automated tire chains on the 2 single-axle plow trucks.
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley, you had a question?
Couple of points, Mr. Mayor. I guess my concern is I don't see this as a competitive quote because it was international to international. There was no other quote. And so I'll be asking for a recorded vote on this, please.
Sure. Let's get a motion first. I need a motion, folks. Councillor Dunn?
I'll give you a motion for the entire package. I've had enough bad weather driving to recognize that heated windshields are really, really important. And the same thing with putting chains on. For me, it's health and safety. These guys count.
So motion as printed?
Yep.
Thank you. Get a seconder. Councillor O'Reilly, do you want to speak to it? You have? I guess my question, and when you're absolutely right, but my question is then why is it an optional item if it's that crucial to the operation of a plow truck? That's where I'm struggling. If these are items that are needed for the safety of our drivers and to look after our routes, then make it part of the package. And when you put it as an optional item, that's where I get a little bit confused and say, if it's optional, you're saying we don't need it, but we'd like to have it. And I'm struggling with that because I agree with you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, from here on in, I can make it a mandatory part of the selection.
Within budget?
As long as it goes with, don't make me laugh. Yes, as long as it's within budget.
Thank you. Councillor Riley, do you want to speak to it? Second it? Any further questions, comments? Recorded vote requested by Councillor Elmsley. Madam Clerk?
Councillor Emsley? Councillor Vale?
In favor.
Councillor Richardson?
In favor.
Councillor Ashmore? Deputy Mayor O'Reilly?
In favor?
Councillor Dunn? In favor. Mayor Latham?
In favor. 2 opposed, 5 in favor. Motion passes. Thank you for the feedback and the discussion. That's our consent item. Sorry, follow up, right? Councillor Elmsley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My follow-up is I would ask that staff bring back a report to council before the next budget cycle, revisiting, showing us the numbers in revisiting why International and Mack are the trucks of choice, because as I see it, Mack...
Just the motion. Just the motion first, and then...
All right.
So is that the cost-benefit analysis that you're referring to? Is that kind of what the
Yeah.
councilor's referring to? The cost-benefit analysis of the various suppliers and the models moving forward? Are you clear?
Yes, that's fine. Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's absolutely the case. We can bring back a discussion on the how the specifications are rationalized and help council understand why we have the specs the way we do.
Perfect. Is that what you're looking for? Okay, and you'll second that, Councillor Dunn? Do you want to speak to it? I think you...
Just briefly, it seems to me if Mack didn't quote last year and chose not to quote this year, we're down to one supplier, and I'd like to see an analysis and see if there isn't an opportunity for us to bring in somebody else or to look wider afield at what we're doing with these trucks.
Okay, call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. We'll move into, we have nothing in petitions. Any extractions from the bylaws? Seeing none. Councillor Dunn, do you mind? Councillor Yeo had the bylaws. Do you have it, Councillor Elmsley? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Dunn, that the bylaws shown in section 12.1 of the agenda, namely items 12.1.1 and including 12.1.7, be read a first, second, and third time, passed, numbered, signed, and the corporate seal attached.
Thank you. All in favor? That's passed. We need to go into closed session, so let's take 10 minutes, and we'll get the cameras shut off, and we'll come back and go into closed session. Thank you. Do you want to pass the motion first? Need the motion, the adoption of the closed session agenda as amended, please. Councillor Riley and Richardson, all in favor? And any disclosure of pecuniary interest in closed session items? Seeing none.